Hi, my name is Colin, and I am a grateful member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is the follow-up to my reading of The Vicious Cycle, the story from the Big Book. This is my follow-up video where I discuss the parts of the story that were of particular significance to me. Before I get started, I'm going to say there was a lot in this story that I really related to, so this is probably going to be one of my longer commentary videos, so I guess I hope you manage to stick it through with me if you feel like it. So let's, without further ado, here we go. I'm going to start off with the ways I really identified with him in terms of sort of life before AA. And the very first thing he's talking about, right, is his family. And he says, my family lived in a very, on page 221, my family lived in very prosperous circumstances, and while both my parents drank, sometimes too much, neither was an alcoholic. And yeah, absolutely. I grew up in fairly prosperous circumstances, either high middle class or lower upper class. And my parents did, and those who are still alive do like to drink. And they may or may not be alcoholics, depending on your definition, but they're very happy people. Most of my family are very happy drunks, which is to say, they get together, they have a few drinks, they laugh, they dance, they might drink more, they'll keep laughing, they'll keep dancing. It's very, very happy. It's a very jolly drunken environment. But, conversely, I do have a few family members that had sort of gone over the edge and gone down to the dark side of needing to drink and not being happy when they drank, and it sort of being like the only thing in their life that got rid of all the pain, but only caused more pain. And so, I've seen a few of them do that, but for the most part, they're very, very happy drunks. And that's what I grew up seeing. But, didn't quite work with me. So anyway, and then further on down the same page, still on 221, he talks about his time in school, right? Until I was 13, I attended public schools with regular promotions and average grades. I have never shown any particular talents, nor have I had any real frustrating ambitions. And yeah, I wasn't quite as good as he was. I repeated first grade. I was in special ed from my first year of first grade to third grade. Like, school was never something that came easy to me. And it's not that I'm not intelligent. I was just a little bit slow. But once I caught up, it was okay. But I never had any, like, clear talent or ambition. I remember watching Bend It Like Beckham, which is a movie about female football players in England. And these two girls, they have so much drive and ambition, and just football, or soccer, if you're American, which I guess I am, was what their lives were all about. And I remember feeling so jealous because I didn't have anything like that. I had no real point or purpose. I had no insane drive. So, I just sort of puttered along and kept thinking that some sort of a drive would show up, and nothing has. And I don't know if it ever will, but I'm much more okay with it than I used to be. Finding my own way, not waiting for, like, inspiration and this is what I can give my life to, because no. Well, and especially, when I was in the middle of my disease, drunk and depressed, there was nothing external that was going to snap me out of it. There was nothing that, like, oh my gosh, I must give up depression and drinking right now because I must play the piano. That was never going to happen. So further on, he discusses page 2. He discusses on page 224 The bottom paragraph, as long as things were tough and the job a challenge, I could always manage to hold on pretty well. But as soon as I learned the combination, got the puzzle under control, and the boss to pat me on the back, I was gone again. Absolutely, absolutely. I start a project, I'm like, woohoo, gung-ho, all in, yeah. But one of two things happen. One, I lose motivation halfway through, and then whatever project I started stays in that state of utter chaos, which isn't good. Because like if my project is reorganizing my closet and I lose motivation halfway through, my clothes are going to be all over the floor in random piles until I get motivation again, which might be anywhere from tomorrow to 2 years from now. So I'm trying not to live like that anymore, because it's not particularly productive. And also, like, I'd get a new job, right? I'd get a new job and I'd be like, okay, yeah, let's figure this out. And the moment I figured it out, I was like, oh God, this is so over and over and over and over. And I couldn't do it. I lost all motivation. I'd slumped back into depression and drinking more. And it was pointless. It was all pointless. Once the puzzle was solved, it was pointless. And so once it was pointless, I couldn't do it anymore. I lost all motivation to do it. And on the bottom of page 225, he discusses the way his thoughts turn, and it's so similar to mine, it's scary. So, my thoughts went round and round with, what's it all about? People have wars and kill each other. They struggle and cut each other's throats for success. And what does anyone get out of it? Haven't I been successful? Haven't I accomplished extraordinary things in business? What do I get out of it? Everything's all wrong, and the hell with it. And that is just so utterly, powerfully true of the way I used to think. To me, life was pointless and meaningless. You're here, you slog through, you die. That's it. That was life. You were born, you trudge your way through the misery that is life, because the only other option is death, and that will happen eventually. So just keep on trudging, keep your head down, and trudge, and wait for death. Because life is pointless, and life is meaningless, and life is pain. And that was my view for an incredibly long time, and that is such a horrible, horrible way to live. Because it's not really living. It's not living at all. And, yeah. So, but before I start spouting off the other side of that, I'll continue reading from his stuff, because I'm sure it'll circle back around again. So, pointlessness. Right, and then I'm going to go back to page 221, where he discusses, on the beginning of the first whole paragraph, the age-old question in AA is which came first, the neurosis or the alcoholism. And for me, it was absolutely the neurosis. I was shy. I had massive social anxieties. I lacked basic social skills. And, eventually, when the hormones started kicking in, became unbelievably depressed. And it's an unfortunate byproduct of my brain. Stuff is out of balance for me. And so I get incredibly depressed. And I self-medicated that for years. So I absolutely know that the neurosis came before the addiction. But I don't really think it matters. In the vicious cycle, he thinks the addiction came first. The addiction caused the neuroses. But it doesn't really matter. AA is not a bastion of mental health. We all have stuff wrong with us. And, the steps in the program and the rooms are all designed to help us find a way to live that doesn't involve self-medication and self-destruction. But that question is one that I hear a lot of people ponder. Okay, so we're going to go on to his bottom. And his bottom, involved a drunken binge and being found. And what I really like about what he has to say about it, though, is on the very top of page 221. So I always say that as long as I remember January 8th, that is how long I will remain sober. And that is one of the key components that I've learned from AA, which is you have to remember your last drunk. You have to remember your bottom. I have to remember my bottom, because if I forget my bottom, I remember how much I liked drinking and how much fun I had while drinking. And I forget that I literally can't drink the way I used to. I forget the fact that my body has physically changed, and what I used to be able to do and considered fun, I literally can't do anymore. If I tried to do that, I will end up in some bad, gnarly, bad situations that I ended up in. That was my bottom. And so my bottom involved tsunami night, a lot of drinking the weekend before Halloween, and a transgendered male to female individual who we were friendly, but we were never friends. But I got shit-faced drunk and ended up making out with her. And the thing is, and I totally support the trans community. It's just that I don't do dick, no matter how nice the tits attached to it are. I'm not about the dick. I don't want, stubble rash on my face or anywhere. And her tits weren't particularly nice. They were very hard and plastic, and I ended up with bruises on my rib cages, and it's just it was bad. It was really bad. So remember that, and as long as I remember that, I'm not gonna drink alcoholically anymore, because it leads to bad places involving dicks. Anywho, so yeah, I really like that is part of his program, and that he's one of the early people, so he's one of the first to really realize how important it is to remember the last drunk. Okay, on to fellowship, and he first sort of touches on it on page 220 in the bottom paragraph. All of us in AA know the tremendous happiness that is our sobriety, but there are also tragedies. And I like that, because life is the full spectrum of emotions, and what AA tries to provide through its fellowship and its 12 steps is a way of feeling and processing the full spectrum of emotions, whether it's happiness or sadness, ups, downs, sidewaysness, you name it. AA is there to provide a way of living with life and living with emotions, and I think the phrase is life on life's terms. And so, his owning on the second page of his story that there are tragedies, that life has tragedies, I think is incredibly important, but also to remember that it isn't just tragedies, it's the full spectrum. And then we get a little bit of the fellowship and his difficulties with God. And before I read these, I'm going to preface this by saying the religious aspect always sort of frustrated me in AA and stopped me from coming to an AA for a long period of time. Because I heard it and it sounded kind of interesting, but it had all this God stuff in it, and I'm not a religious person. I'd like to think I'm a spiritual person, but I am not a religious person by any stretch of the imagination. So it's difficult. And so pretty much everyone in the fellowship is religious. And so there is this sort of element of me that isn't really connected. And that's what I'm about to read when he's dealing with this. So on pages 226 and 227. On 226, at the time I thought them just a swell pair of screwballs, for they were not only going to save all the drunks in the world, but also all the so-called normal people. All they talked about that first weekend was God and how they were going to straighten out Jackie's and my life. Despite all this, I did like these new friends because, again, they were like me. And on page 227, we have, at the bottom, yet we all had one sincere purpose in our hearts, and that was not to drink. And that's that's the thing for me. I like the fellowship. I like the program. I like these bunch of happy screwballs. But they're not even religious. They have so much faith in a, generally speaking, a Judeo-Catholic God, and I'm just like, because I don't. I believe in a lot of scientific principles. I believe that energy is constant. I believe that there's a balance to the universe. But I really don't think there's some almighty being aware of everything. And if there is, I am absolutely sure that said being does not give a fuck about me. Because if you look out into the incredible vast expansion that is the universe, and the length of just like a galactic year, which basically I think there's one species on Earth, I think, that had its entire species length time has existed for half of a galactic year, which is how long it takes our solar system to spin around the black hole at the middle of the Milky Way galaxy. There's one species that was there like in almost like early primordial ooze. So basically it's just I mean, come on. Nothing is gonna care about me all that much. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because I like my higher power. I like what I have chosen. And that gets me into some of the tricks about this. And obviously this is a story in the big book, so the guy does ultimately find a higher power, however tenuous, and it takes him a very long time. And maybe I will and maybe I won't. I just know I haven't yet. But he talks about, in the very, very beginning of the program on the top of 227, during that first weekend, I decided to stay in New York and take all they gave out with, except the God stuff. I knew they needed to straighten out their thinking and habits, but I was all right. I just drank too much. And so I read both those sentences, because the second one, I think, I don't agree with the second one. I needed to straighten out my thinking. I still need to straighten out my thinking. I'm better, but it's a continuous process, and I am not yet done. So, yeah, but I am at least trying to figure out how to do it without the God stuff, because I don't believe. And I don't think it's that I'm not willing to believe. It's just that I don't believe. And, they say into the agnostics that everyone sort of believes, but I think they're assuming that people grew up with some sort of religion and then rejected it at some point in their lives, whereas I didn't. I've never had a background in religion. I mean, I've sort of studied religions from a philosophical standpoint and a historical standpoint, so I know a lot about a lot of different religions, but I wasn't ever raised in any sort of a faith. And so faith comes very hard to me, period. And then you add faith into something that there's absolutely no proof of, and it gets complicated. But just because I don't believe in that doesn't mean I can't be spiritual. And he talks later on about how after he'd fallen off the wagon and had finally started to see the merit in believing, started to see that all these people who believed were genuinely happier and more content. He discusses on page 229, for a long time the only higher power I could concede was the power of the group. But this was far more than I had ever recognized before, and it was at least a beginning. And yes, I sort of, in order to be able to say God when I lead a meeting, because when the Serenity Prayer gets said, the leader says God, and I say universe. But when I'm leading a meeting, it just doesn't feel appropriate. So I say God, and I keep running through my head, good orderly direction and group of drunks and good orderly direction and group of drunks, because I do have faith in this group of drunks. I have faith in AA. And I have faith in the good orderly direction that are the steps and are everything that I've sort of worked out for my life thus far. And, so I have faith in that. So I have faith, which is more than I ever had before I stepped into these rooms, like him. But I don't really have faith in on high just yet. And then he says at the bottom of page 229, so my only contribution to their literary efforts was my firm conviction, since I was still a theological rebel, that the word God should be qualified with the phrase, as we understand him, for that was the only way I could accept spirituality. And I love this man. That contribution was so unbelievably important because it enabled me to come into the rooms. It has enabled Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and agnostics all to come into this room. It's still a little bit tricky for atheists because there is no belief, so there is no as I understand it. But as I understand is incredibly important. And I wanted to start with the good stuff first because the feminist in me and all of that, I'm like, him? Why is it a capital H? Oh my God, that's so sexist and heteronormative. And I'm trying not to immediately criticize things anymore and to accept and truly appreciate, not just accept, but truly appreciate the value of those words, because that was huge. Without those words, my understanding and what I chose as a higher power, or at least a power greater than myself, it wouldn't be an option, really. AA would be much more Christian-oriented, I think. And while there are a lot of meetings that are tradition for, I think, ensures that there can be a lot of meetings that aren't. And that, to me, is so important, so incredibly important, because my power greater than myself is not any sort of a god or an entity with intelligence or anything like that. It's basically the universe. Well, it's not big. It is the universe. And in the grand scheme of things, I mentioned this early in the video, in the grand scheme of things, I am less than a grain of sand. This is absolutely true. This is completely true. However, there's the flip side to that, right? There are atoms. And, I can't remember what comedian said it, but he said, I love people because if you look into their eyes, if you properly look into their eyes, you can see the universe. And I love that because every single cell in my body contains more atoms than there are stars in the average galaxy. And so, during my existential crisis phase and none of it matters and it's not important at all, there's an important caveat to that. There's an important flip side to that, which is if nothing matters, if all we have is right here and right now, and there's no guarantee of tomorrow, and there's certainly no guarantee of an afterlife, and all that we have is right here and right now, then right now is all that matters. If nothing matters, then everything matters. Because when you get on scales that incredibly vast, it means the same thing. And so getting to that flip side, getting to the point where I could realize that everything matters was so incredibly hard for me. And like I said, I'm doing it without God or the traditional view of God, but I've gotten there. And I think that makes me an incredibly spiritual person, the realization that because nothing matters, everything matters. And because everything matters, my decisions matter, and my choices matter. And my decision to be happy versus sad matters. And it matters to me, and it matters to my family, and it matters to a lot of people. And just because it's all meaningless and pointless at the end doesn't mean it doesn't matter right now. Because it does. It absolutely does. And so finding that, the other side of the coin, was an incredibly long and challenging process, and something I'm still working on. I'm not going to lie. I have bad days where I can barely get out of bed because none of it matters. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Usually I'm remembering that there's goodness to life as well, and that life does matter. And that, like I said, is sort of, I guess, God as I understand God. So yeah, with that, I guess I'm done. Thank y'all for sticking around. Feel free to post response videos, comments, go wild or not, as y'all see fit out there in YouTubeverse. Just remember, be kind, because it matters, and because if you're not, I'm gonna delete your post. Okay, thank y'all.